Hello again, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of the Paradox Podcast, a podcast about the business of video games with me, Daniel Goldberg, and you, Shams Jorjani. We need to come up with a new intro. I've said that so many times now.
I don't think we need a new intro.
I'm tired of my own voice.
You do marketing at Paradox, and I do business development.
That is correct. And this is a podcast about the business of video games, where we try to shed a little bit of light on the inner workings of this glorious business called video games.
That's
where
true.
we all find ourselves.
What's the topic for today?
Today, we're going to do a bit of a Q&A. We're going to pick up some of the questions and discussions that have been happening on the Paradox Forum, on the thread dedicated to this glorious podcast, and also some of the comments we've gotten on YouTube and on Reddit from you people who are kind enough to listen to us, and just sort of pick up some interesting points that have been made, and maybe clarify or add some nuance to discussions where we think that might be.
So useful. Mid-year catch-up episode, kind of what they in the TV industry call a bottle episode.
Yeah. True. Yeah, very good. We're tying all of the loose ends together, right?
Yes.
Let's skip the what have we been playing thing, and instead talk about the recent announcement that Nintendo made just a couple of days ago about the new Switch, the Nintendo Switch Lite. Did you see it?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm kind of assuming that most of you who are listening to this have seen this, but Nintendo announced a couple of days back that a new edition of the wildly successful Switch will be arriving in, I think they said, is it September?
Oh, wow.
Sure,
that's soon.
September.
I totally missed.
Later on this year, anyway.
Okay. It's slightly smaller.
Slightly smaller. You can't connect it to your TV. You can't detach the controllers, the Joy-Cons from the side. So it's portable only, right?
Yeah.
But in terms of beyond that, the hardware is the same. It obviously plays the same game.
It has longer battery time.
Does it?
Yes.
They didn't talk about that at all in there.
In the comparison chart they have, it says up to 7 hours depending on the game,
right.
which is a lot.
And what do they say for the normal Switch then? 4 hours or 5 or something?
It's something like that.
Yeah.
So with the Lite, you can play Zelda for 4 hours.
Yeah.
Which is the kind of powerhouse.
That's not bad.
It comes in 3 colors.
Comes in 3 colors.
Slightly smaller form factor.
Yes. And it's priced at $199.
So it's $100 less.
It's $100 less than the normie Switch.
Yeah. So it's obviously very interesting to talk from a business perspective. I think it's genius on one end because
it's Nintendo genius.
It's Nintendo genius. Like they play the market on their own rules.
Yeah.
Like it's virtually the same as the PSP, but better.
Yeah,
everything around it. Yeah. So it's genius because obviously they're going to probably make a ton of profit off the machine itself.
Yeah.
But it also allows them to maintain a high price point on the proper Switch.
Yeah.
They don't have to lower the price points for that.
Exactly.
I think they're gonna reach other types of markets, and I think a lot of people who have been holdouts are like, well, I don't really need another home console. I'm probably gonna pick this up for travel. And it's genius.
Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely brilliant in so many ways. I'll probably buy one.
But you have a Switch, right?
Yes, I do. Yes.
So why would you get one?
Because it's desirable. It looks nice. It's something new from Nintendo.
Let me then ask you,
and it's cheap enough.
Would you get it for yourself or your kid?
Well, sort of both, right? Okay. My kid is 5 years old, so...
Yeah, so is mine. So my question is, how often do you play docked versus portable?
See, that's the interesting one, right? One of the primary reasons why I bought the Switch was the fact that you could dock it and play it on your TV.
Yeah.
However, I would say probably 99% of my time with the Switch is in portable mode.
Okay.
I hardly ever use the docking functionality at all. So for me, that's not even it's not a big deal, right?
For me, it's 50-50, but I don't connect it to my big TV. I connect it to my computer monitor.
Ah, interesting. Yeah. Well, you won't be able to do that with the new one, though.
No.
Yeah.
So I probably won't get the new one.
Okay, interesting. Not even for your kid, for travel?
No, we'll see. Maybe in 3 years' time, but that time I expect to get the Xbox Zune portable or whatever.
But see, this is in many ways classic Nintendo, right? They're masters of repackaging, reintroducing their hardware again and again, and over in various editions. I don't even know how many editions there are of starting back at the Game Boy. Really, there's just so many different iterations of it. Where and the same for the DS, obviously.
Yeah.
And the key is that the hardware is really the same. all the time, meaning it gets cheaper and cheaper to produce, meaning the profit margins increase. The form factor changes, the design changes. There are all these small tweaks where certain things are removed, but they're not crucial for a very specific portion of the audience or the market. So you kind of give yourself this nice new boost in sales, whilst, as you say, keeping the price point fairly intact.
Yeah, I think also Gustav Groth mentioned, he's one of our product managers, he mentioned in the Slack that Nintendo's strategy is so interesting in the sense that they don't always have the content, but the way they kind of approach it is that if we have 100 million users, the content will come. Yeah. Because the people making content will want the audience. Yeah. So instead of first going out and getting the audience, they just make sure that they have this giant install base.
But it's not just that. It also speaks to the strength of their first party catalog, right? Yeah. It was interesting to see that the games that they used, that they highlighted for this, were the same games as when the Switch released. They're still showcasing, Super Mario, Zelda, and Pokemon. So it's the same games,
but
right?
It seems like not every single game will be compatible with the...
No, but just could you imagine Microsoft or Sony doing the same thing? Like releasing a new...
Halo.
No, that's the point, right? They're not really releasing new games. They're using the same games to push this system or this iteration of the hardware. Could you imagine like a new generation of the Xbox coming out, and the games used to promote it are, 2 years old? It just doesn't happen, right?
And the reason for that is that the positioning for the new consoles is it's new. Yeah. It's pushing the envelope constantly. Yeah. Well, Nintendo's saying that we're not interested in pushing the envelope.
Exactly.
We want good experiences, and that's why, even just churning out remakes of old experiences is going to be,
well, it's not even remakes. It's literally the same thing.
It's literally the same game.
It's a 2-year-old game that is being used to push a brand new hardware. Very interesting. Yeah, very interesting. I'm going to buy one. But anyway, enough about that. Let's dive into some questions and answers then, shall we?
Fantastic. Let's do that.
So we've been combing through comment sections, and we're still alive.
Yep.
And we picked out a couple of things that we wanted to sort of that we thought was really interesting and worth discussing in more detail. So Seamus83 posted a comment on YouTube on one of our episodes. I think the most recent one we did about the Epic Store, where he asks, I wonder how you guys feel about the 30% cut that Steam takes compared to Epic, and then compare that to what the the console platforms, PS4 and Xbox, take. When do you feel that a platform holder does enough to justify that 30% cut? So basically the question is, what is fair here, right?
Similar to what Chairman Wester tweeted about. He says it's outrageous.
Exactly. So the official Paradox position is that 30% is outrageous.
Well,
no, but let's dive into this with
let's unpack it a bit.
Some more detail. Yeah.
So I think it depends very much on who you are and what you can provide yourself via your ecosystem. Like for a lot of 30% is, I think, is also a number that is inherited from another industry. It's not like somebody actually looked at a business case and said, okay, this is reasonable and let's go with 30.
This is really what Apple decided with the App Store.
It's even before that. Oh, it's from the retail industry.
Oh,
the cut that was taken. But
interesting.
So it predates that. So it's been this legacy thing, and which has probably been in the favor of the platform holders, and they haven't wanted to change it.
Sure.
Until Tim Sweeney came along, and they just kept it at whatever it was. But obviously, if you are a smaller company and don't have back-end services, if you don't have all the DevOps resources to create all the ancillary services around the game, except the game itself, achievements, community features, forums, all these things, I think you're getting a lot of value out of the 30%. But if you are someone like us or Larian or Fat Shark, where you have an established audience, you have an established tech base, you have a lot of the functionalities, or you don't even need them or have them yourselves, you have your own content delivery system. Then the question is that why are you then paying the full 30% when you're not using all the services? And I think it's a valid question in some cases, but it depends on who you are and what you need.
I think you can approach this on an even higher level. It's really just supply and demand, right? I mean, the reason, and you see this sort of ebb and flow in all industries where power shifts from, producers of goods, as it were, to distributors of goods, and back and forth, right? Steam for such a long time has been really the only window to reach at least in certain parts of the world, right? Yeah. The only window to reach the majority of PC gamers. So there's huge value in that. There's insane value in that. You need Steam, or you've needed Steam to be successful in the PC space. So it doesn't really matter if Steam, it's not really a question of what's fair. It's like, if Steam asks you for access to that window, you need to give them 80% of your profits, or 80% of your, I mean, you haven't got a choice, right?
No.
But what's happening now is that the landscape is changing. Yeah. Partly it's just digital distribution. It's infinitely easier for people like us or anyone to just sell direct to consumer now than it was just a couple of years back. Partly it's the entry of new competitors into that space, like the Epic Store. Partly it's the growth of other platforms that are not PC, other business models that are not premium, and what have you. And it all plays into a power shift where more of the power is transferred from the distribution channel and back to us as the content providers, right? And that just means that there's room for a discussion like this for the first time in a long time. It just makes sense to start questioning this. Is this really fair, right?
Yeah. We should point out that Steam has other tiers than 30%. For sure.
Steam have made changes to this as well. And this is just, I'm sure this is just the beginning of a conversation that's going to go on for a long, long time. But I think the point is that it's really hard to say what's fair and what exactly is enough to justify 30%, because it just depends on the market.
It's not about ethics or morals. Is it fair?
No, it's not, and it's not even about features either. You can't say that so a modding platform is worth 7%.
Yeah.
Whatever, an achievement system is worth 6%. You can't say that because it depends on what everyone else is offering.
Yeah.
So I think that it's impossible to say what's fair. What you can say is that we as a publisher working with the PC is not the only platform we're active on, but it's a very important one for us. Steam is hugely important. Without Steam, we just wouldn't be in business. It just wouldn't work. But you can also say that the fact that other people that this kind of the 30% norm or paradigm is being challenged is a good thing for us. This is good for us as a publisher. It's a really good time to be a content provider in the games industry right now. It's probably less of a good time to be a distributor.
Yeah, I can go back to the podcast episode we had with Jordan Wiseman, where he said it's never been such a good and bad time as a content creator.
Right.
Because there are more ways and cheaper ways than ever to make content. But as a result of that, competition is fiercer than ever. Yeah. There's more content than ever, which makes it terrible to be a content producer.
So I think the answer is that it's impossible to say when a platform holder does enough to justify a 30% cut, because whether the threshold should be 30% or 20% or 12% or 5% or even 70%, it just depends on market conditions, right? Yeah. We need distributors to reach our audience. Yeah. And then how much we give them just depends on how many there are, how big the audience is.
I think maybe the more preposterous, I think it's less about Steam's 30%, but why has a smaller site been taking 30%? Because when they're not offering the same leverage that Steam is able to.
Exactly.
I don't know. I won't mention any of the smaller ones, but no, let's just say that through our own store, it would be preposterous if we charge 30%.
Yeah, but also... Yeah, to someone else, yes. But I think the one thing that is maybe forgotten here, which is very important, is that running your own distribution channel is also super expensive. Like, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of, it costs a lot of money. So, I mean, we've been running the numbers on this, and it's not a given that yes, all of the money, if you buy through the Paradox Store, which we obviously love it if you do, all of the money technically goes to us. But then we have to pay for maintaining the store. We have to pay for, developing it. There's staff. There's all of these costs associated with it. So it's not always clear that we make more money from selling that way than we do through someone else. No. It's not always a clear-cut case, right? No. So it's a complicated question. I think we're very committed to our strategy. We want our games to be available wherever the players want them. So we have no intention to limit ourselves to only distributing through our own channel. We haven't struck any exclusive deals with any distribution platforms yet. We might consider that in the future. It all depends, right? It depends on where do we think the players are. How does a deal like that mitigate the risk in a project and what have you. But we have no intention of only distributing through our own channels, as it were. We want to leverage all of the different distribution channels that are out there. Good. Whew. It's a topic that keeps on giving.
Let's see what happens.
Thank you, Tim Sweeney, for providing us with fodder for infinite podcast episodes. Yeah. Okay, so let's. Was that it? Did you have any final words on that? No. Okay, so let's move on to our good friend Dark Master, who posted, good nickname, who posted in the Paradox forum asking us, and this is an interesting one, I think. I was wondering if you could give some more information on what sort of projects you do research on. For example, have you made serious efforts in trying to make grand strategy-like games for mobile platforms? What were the biggest challenges with that? What other sorts of projects would you like to make but haven't been able to get to work yet? And what are the major hurdles to overcome? So basically the question here is about, what kind of stuff have we considered but haven't actually done yet?
Yes.
And why?
Okay, I can try to tackle this. So first off, we've got to remember that the background is Paradox is very focused, niche. We know what works in our core business, and we're careful not to disrupt that. At the same time, we want to innovate and try different things. But if any listener of this podcast know that opportunity cost is a big thing. But we definitely try a lot of things, and the end result is that we don't pursue a lot of things beyond the trying. I don't think it's a huge secret that we've had, our grand strategy games up and running on tablets. It's a question of optimization and a lot of challenges, but ultimately it comes back to some stuff like business model. How would you handle a grand strategy game on tablets? And, we could absolutely, positively, probably just port and release any of our grand strategy games on a high-end tablet today. We have it running, but that doesn't mean that it's running as the same as we're going to release it. And it's not even the fact that we couldn't make money off of it. The thing is that we don't think that we could make enough money to justify the effort, because that effort could be spent
somewhere else. Yeah.
So if you look at Civilization, that was released on tablets, it came at a premium price, and it did okay, as I understand it, but not amazing. If you look at XCOM on tablets, it did okay, but not amazing. Yeah. And to us, the reason, getting into mobile is quite painful. Yeah. So we're saying that if we want to get into mobile, it better be a pretty good payoff. So we're not doing it for the sake of okay success. Because if we want okay success, we can do a lot of other stuff that is less painful. Yeah. So that's one aspect in the mobile side. So then the better question becomes, how would one do a grand strategy game that can be wildly successful on mobile? Well, it probably needs to be free to play. But these things also do change. The only way to do business on mobile really sensibly was to do free to play a few years ago. But now mobile is swinging back to premium with Apple Arcade and stuff. So on one hand, it's cumbersome for us to kind of shift and rethink, because maybe we should not be putting Johan and Henrik and Jake
and the game directors working on our existing PDS brands,
having them create free to play grand strategy games on mobile. Maybe other people should.
Yeah, because if we ask them to do that, or if they, it's more the case of them saying that they want to do that. Yeah. They won't be working on our PC premium stuff, right? So, and I think the key here is, how do you define success, right? And it's not, I think it's important to make that clear. It's not about the success of one single release, right? Mobile for us is about figuring out what in the many things that make our games special, what can be successfully transplanted into the mobile space, and how can you make it make sense there? The game itself might be very different, but can you make something that is different but still retains the core of what makes something like Stellaris special, for example? Yes. And that includes very likely, I think, and this is hypotheticals, right? But a Stellaris experience on mobile would very likely have to be free to play. And how do you then make that work, right? With all that entails.
But to continue on that, let's abstract it even one bigger level, because when we talk about it on a Paradox level, we say that Paradox would like to have success on mobile.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that every single brand or game line needs to be on mobile. We're just saying that something needs to be on mobile.
Exactly.
So we could be in a position in 10 years where we have 30% of our revenue from mobile, but not a single one of the games that we have today are actually on mobile. It'll be an entirely new IP.
Exactly.
It might even be that, it's not going to happen, but we could achieve this strategy by just buying Supercell.
Yeah.
Obviously, they were bought by Tencent for an ungodly amount of money, but just Theoretically, we could just buy a mobile company that makes hardcore games on mobile and just say that is what our definition of success on mobile is.
Yeah.
So it's not, we try to very abstract it. Instead of looking on an individual level, why is not CK2 on mobile? We try to have a bigger perspective and talk about the long term. What is success in terms of mobile?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think also approaching the question from a slightly different perspective, not just talking about mobile, I think it's important to point out that there are so many things that are done and tried, but that are never announced or released to the wider world.
Yeah.
The way we approach these things is that we tend to kill a lot of projects at a very early stage, simply because it's we think it's better to try a lot of things and then be very strict with what we actually finish. So kill stuff off when we feel that, before we've invested too much money and time into it. So kill it if it doesn't seem to be working. Yeah. And this happens all the time. I think we've said in the past that something like 50% of all games that are sort of started are never announced. They're killed before they're announced.
It's somewhere between 20 to 40%.
All right, okay.
Depending on the year and segment and blah, blah, blah. But it's a high percentage.
Yeah, exactly.
And the point is, like, canceling a project is not failure.
Exactly.
It's learning.
Yeah. We spoke about this with Ashkan, the producer, who was a guest at one of our episodes quite recently, so that might be worth digging up.
And we'll be coming back to this when we talk about the Paradox business pillars, which is something we'll be talking about this fall.
Yeah, as soon as you finish them.
They're actually finished now.
Oh, they are?
Did I not send you a draft?
No. Okay. Well, you sent me a draft, but it's not done yet, right? Anyway, we also had a question, or actually a pretty long, really good post from ST Nylan, again on the Paradox forums, on the official Paradox podcast thread, talking about, after the episode we did recently on the Imperator release, talking about, it's a really good post. I really encourage all of you to read it, talking about the difficulty in terms of managing expectations of an audience in a constantly moving and changing marketplace, I think was the key of it. So the argument is basically that, for context, we recently released Imperator Rome, our latest grand strategy game from PDS. We're very proud of the game. The reception from our fans wasn't what we had hoped for. It was quite a lot lower than we had hoped for, actually. I think Steam reviews at some point were at 37% or something, which is really not where we want to be as a company. The team is hard at work on improving stuff now. We've released a number of updates already, and things are moving in the right direction. But we did an episode with Johan Andersson, the game director, a couple of weeks back, talking about the learnings from this and how we would approach it. And the post in question was really a response to that. Okay. So the general point that is being made is that as Paradox as a company grows, as our success grows and our player base grows, and also as the industry evolves and just the size and the scope and the ambition of the games that hit the market grows, the expectations from our fan base on what a new game should be like also changes. How big is it? How much does it contain? How polished is it? And all of that stuff. And that's a tricky one for us, because we very much, when we put a new game out, that is very much the start of a long journey, right? Yeah, our games are platforms. Our games are platforms that are improved upon and iterated upon for years and years after release. So how do you strike that balance, and how do you clearly set the expectations of your fans about what this game is going to be when it releases. And I don't think there's not a yes or no question in here, but it's something that is really interesting to talk about. Discuss, So I think that this is a risk anyone has whenever you make a sequel to any previously successful product. And it doesn't matter if it's Sims 3, Gears of War, Halo. Expectations are generally higher. And we constantly discuss this, because at some point, in the future, there will be sequels to every single product that is successful, which includes Paradox.
which means that for many of these cases, the biggest competitor will not be Firaxis or Creative Assembly. It's going to be ourselves and the previous product.
And the same thinking can be applied, even though Imperator is not technically a sequel.
No.
It's still very much, it's a PDS grand strategy game, so it comes with the same types of expectations from its core audience, right?
So, and I think that what we come back to is that the higher the quality initially, the bigger the challenge for the sequel to happen. There are a number of factors that come into it. So, for instance, we often look at the move from EU3 to EU4, and how that was. We can clearly say it was a huge success in terms of actually doing a sequel. There was very little. Whenever there's a new civilization that comes out, the previous civilization still has stronger numbers for almost like a full year until both games have super strong numbers, and then a year after that, the latest one has clearly overtaken. For EU3 to EU4, there was a fairly quick switch. The die down time for EU3 was fairly fast.
Interesting.
Because EU4 was it was a much stronger product. It was a true sequel that really achieved what a lot of sequels needed to do. But in that case, it was easy because we also clearly changed the business model between the games. So that was a huge value.
How was the business model changed? Just for
EU3 used the old business model, which was essentially every time a new expansion came out, it made the game, the previous stuff obsolete. You couldn't buy them independently from each other, so they were done and bought in serial. So you couldn't buy the third expansion but not have the two first ones, essentially. Or when we updated the game, that essentially mean that the latest expansion just changed how everything worked. We didn't have this modular approach that we have today, which really made things obsolete in a bad way. So that was one part of it. And it was the fact that you had to have all the DLC to play multiplayer with everyone else. And also was the fact that EU3, while a good game, didn't have the same level of quality. And it had a foot very firmly in the last generation in terms of graphics, UI, UX, a lot of quality of life stuff. So EU4 kind of just like, it had improved its model. It looked much better, and it fixed a lot of lingering long-term issues that existed within the concept. But EU4 wasn't dramatically different in terms of design compared to EU3.
And in terms of the actual content, I'm assuming it was lighter, because if you owned EU3 with all of the expansions.
I don't remember exactly if it was on par, slightly more or slightly less. But the point is, it had passed a certain hygiene factor level. And I think that that's something we miss with Imperator, that there was a certain hygiene factor level, and we missed that. So in the case of EU4, it was easy. CK2, also easy, because CK1 was even older and even trashier. And same with Victoria, right? And Hearts of Iron 4 was also the same. So there's a factor where there needs to be clearly enough of a quality shift between them. But all these previous ones, EU3, Victoria 1, CK1, Hearts of Iron 3, they scored fairly high, but had clear issues. The problem now with these games being with platforms is that they're honed to almost perfection. So it is much harder for us. So it becomes a question of some things, we're hitting some kind of dead ends with CK2, and Stellaris has been retooled a number of times. And this starts to tell us that we're hitting the limits, which allows us to build a gap towards the next one, I think.
Exactly.
But it's a mix of timing, quality of life, having a certain hygiene factor level, and also actually having a number of new features, which just clearly sets it apart compared to the old one. So you can do an evolutionary take, which EU4 was an evolutionary take, an incremental steps forward, quality of life across the board, or you could do a revolutionary leap forward, which does quality of life and drastically changes design. And then
I agree. And then when it comes to the how you position the product in the marketplace, so this is really the expectations management part of it. There's obviously all of these big buttons that you can push here. One is just ensuring that the narrative, and it depends on where you go with this, right? But ensuring that the narrative around the game reflects what it actually is. So is it a new beginning for something maybe? Is it a fresh start? Or is it, as you say, is it a completely new take on the the core tenets of the previous game? So ensuring that the communication is very clear, and then just hoping that this resonates with your players and that people actually pick up on this. The other one is you can experiment with price points. You can experiment with business models.
Yeah.
So again, just taking your reasoning to its natural endpoint. I think if we say that our games are platforms, then the price point to enter onto that platform isn't really that important, right? If the point of
it's the Gillette principle.
Exactly. Exactly right. It's not the razor, it's the blades. If the point of a hypothetical CK3 is to deliver a platform that will continually be fed new content over years and years to come, the point of the base game is just to bring people onto that platform. So it could theoretically be free.
Yeah.
Even though, of course, then the business case has to hold up and all that stuff. But in theory, right? Same thing goes for things like, I mean, the early access model, the name early access has a lot of connotations today. It means a lot of stuff, but at its core, we're talking about making a game playable and purchasable whilst it still is in development, right?
Yeah.
So you could argue that most of our games follow that principle. It's just that the calling them early access would be slightly misleading because people would then take that kind of means a lot of stuff today that wouldn't necessarily apply directly to our games. But that's another really interesting route to take. Like, what if we were to release games even earlier, right?
Yeah, it mitigates some things. It introduces other types of problems. I think that there's an old rule that says for any sequel, 1/3 kept the same, 1/3 is improved, and 1/3 is entirely new.
Yeah.
And this is not necessarily a bad way of countering all the major issues. You're keeping people happy because they have the same cool stuff that they want, but you need to know what they actually liked. You have to improve the 30% that people really hated, that wasn't functioning but had a good idea.
Yeah.
And then have a couple of new cool hooks via stuff that people haven't seen before.
Exactly.
And I think Civ 5, John Schaefer's iteration, was one of the best examples of this. It had the basic Civ formula. It took some of the basic concepts of Civ and improved them radically, and then it completely changed the kind of with the approach of the tiles and how that was set up and city management. So you could argue that wasn't big enough to warrant entirely new, but we have to go about it in different ways. So it's we don't have any firm answers. This is something we struggle with a lot. Because we will be making a lot of sequels in the next few years, and we know that our main competitors will be ourselves, and we need to kind of talk about these things and figure out how to do it in a sensible way.
And it's kind of it's a position we've gotten ourselves in, right? As you say, we're our own biggest competitor, and our success is kind of the issue here that we have to overcome, right? But it's a very present discussion, and it's something that is being discussed a lot internally. And I think maybe tying it back to the original question, yes, the fact that the wider marketplace is also moving on and changing is a factor that we also try to take into account, right?
Yeah.
What is expected of a premium priced PC title today is very, very different from only 3-4 years ago, right? And that even though our games might not be built on the idea of flashy presentation or what have you, those expectations still rub off, and they still mean something for us. So
yeah, and again, I think it comes back to the strength of the platform approach. Is that yes, Imperator is not a Stellaris level of success, but the longevity and strength of us being able to build it over time still allows it to grow and improve over time, rather than it being a fire and forget kind of situation. And we draw a lot of learnings from it, and that helps us do things in other areas. But we're humble before the fact that we do make mistakes, and it's hard as hell to compete against yourself.
Absolutely. We actually covered both of because this kind of morphed into being an answer to. But the other thing we wanted to pick up was just a general discussion about sequels, right? How do you follow up on our success? And we kind of did. We did cover that in this.
Okay, I thought that was the question. Okay.
So I think that's it. I think we're going to wrap this episode there. We will be back in a couple of weeks. Again, hopefully we've been counting the weeks correctly, and you will have a fresh episode to look forward every second week throughout the summer break. And we will be taking a couple of weeks of well-deserved vacation shortly after this. But we will see you all in a couple of weeks' time back in August. And until then, have a lovely summer, and thanks again for listening to our podcast.
Take care.
Bye-bye.